There are certain objects in life that don't just belong to us, they become us. They soak in our tears, absorb our laughter, and hold the fingerprints of time. For Daniel and Claire, that object was a simple golden ring. At first glance, it wasn't much to anyone else, no diamond, no embellishment, just a plain band of gold. But for them, it was the keeper of promises, the silent witness to a life they built together from scratch. Their story began in a small town, where everyone knew each other by name. Daniel was a young mechanic, his hands always marked with grease, but his eyes bright with kindness. Claire worked at the town's little bakery, where the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls followed her everywhere. She was known for her laugh, a laugh that could make even the grumpiest customer leave with a smile. They met in the most ordinary way, and perhaps that's what made it so extraordinary. One rainy afternoon, Daniel ducked into the bakery, dripping wet from fixing a broken-down car on the side of the road. Claire handed him a towel with a playful smirk, saying, "This one's on the house, you look like you need it more than a loaf of bread." That small act of kindness turned into conversation. Conversation turned into late-night walks, and before long, they were inseparable. Their wedding was as modest as their lives. A small gathering in the garden behind Claire's parents' house. No orchestra, no grand decorations, just string lights, wildflowers, and the warmth of friends and family. When Daniel slipped the ring onto Claire's finger, he whispered, "I may not have much to give you, but with this, I give you all of me." She squeezed his hand and replied, "That's all I ever wanted." It was not about the cost of the ring, it was about the vow sealed within it. Life, of course, was not always gentle. They had their share of struggles, days when the money wasn't enough, when bills piled up higher than they could manage. Daniel sometimes worked late into the night, coming home with weary eyes, while Claire took on extra shifts at the bakery. But through it all, the ring on Claire's hand reminded them of why they kept going. They weren't fighting against the world, they were fighting for each other. Then came the joys. The day Claire discovered she was pregnant, she ran down the street barefoot just to tell Daniel, who was working at the garage. He laughed, lifted her in his arms, and kissed her right there in front of everyone, not caring who saw. When their daughter, Emily, was born, Daniel cried harder than he ever had in his life. "She has your eyes," he whispered to Claire, as he held the tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. From that day forward, the little family felt complete. The years that followed were full of the everyday kind of magic that often goes unnoticed. Saturday mornings making pancakes, while Emily tugged at her father's shirt, asking for extra syrup. Evenings spent in the living room, where Claire would hum old songs while folding laundry, and Daniel would fix a broken chair or toy. Sometimes, when the world outside felt too heavy, they'd dance in the kitchen under the dim light, swaying slowly to music only they could hear. The ring glimmered through it all, a quiet reminder that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. And then came the summer day that changed everything. It was a bright afternoon when the family decided to go for a picnic by the river, a favourite spot from their younger days. Emily, now a lively little girl with endless curiosity, begged her father to come play in the water with her. Daniel, always the playful one, rolled up his trousers and waded in. He splashed water at Emily, lifted her onto his shoulders, and spun her around as Claire watched from the shore, laughing and clapping. For a moment, time felt frozen joy, echoing across the riverbank. But then, in the midst of their laughter, it happened. As Daniel reached out to catch Emily when she leapt into his arms, he felt something slip from his finger. He looked down, just in time to see the golden band sink into the rippling water. Panic struck. He dove beneath the surface, searching frantically. The current pulled at him, the sand clouded his vision, but he refused to stop. Again and again, he went under, his chest heaving, his hands sweeping through the water. Claire ran into the shallows, calling his name, but the ring was gone. For hours, they tried. Daniel refused to leave, his fingers raw from digging through rocks, his voice hoarse from calling. Friends who had joined them for the picnic came to help, forming a human chain in the water, but the river kept its secret. As the sun began to set, Daniel stood silently at the edge, his shoulders heavy. Claire touched his arm, whispering, "It's just a ring. What matters is still here." She pressed his hand to her heart, but Daniel's eyes betrayed the ache inside him. To him, it wasn't just a ring, it was their ring, the one he had placed on her finger with trembling hands all those years ago, the one that had carried them through every high and low. That night, as they tucked Emily into bed, Daniel sat in silence by the window. Claire brought him tea, sat beside him, and gently said, "Love isn't in the ring, Daniel. It's in the way you've never let me walk alone, the way you always come back, no matter how hard the day. That's what lasts." He nodded, but inside, he still felt the sting of loss. It wasn't about gold, it was about memory, and memory had slipped through his fingers like water. Over the years, the river became a place Daniel both loved and avoided. They would sometimes return for family outings, and while Emily skipped stones or caught tadpoles, Daniel would always glance at the water, his eyes scanning as if hoping the river would one day give back what it had taken. He never replaced the ring. He said nothing could replace that one. And though Claire understood, she sometimes caught him absent-mindedly touching his bare finger, as if reaching for something invisible. And so, life moved forward. The seasons shifted, Emily grew, and the golden ring remained somewhere in the river's depths, silent, hidden, yet still bound to their story. Time has a way of softening pain, but it doesn't erase it. For Daniel, the absence of that ring remained a quiet ache, like a missing piece of a puzzle that no amount of years could fill. He lived his life fully, yes. He raised Emily with pride, built a modest home with Claire, celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and countless small victories. But every time he saw a wedding band on another man's finger, a shadow of longing crossed his face. He would glance at his bare hand, rub the skin where the ring once was, and fall silent for a moment before returning to conversation. Emily grew into a bright, spirited young woman. She often teased her father about his invisible ring, making light of what she knew was a sore subject. "Dad," she'd say, "if you don't wear a ring, how will people know you're taken?" Daniel would chuckle, shake his head, and reply softly, "They'll know, because I chose your mother every day, ring or no ring," and he did. Claire knew better than anyone that no piece of jewellery could contain the depth of their love. Yet still, on quiet nights, she caught Daniel gazing out the window toward the river, lost in thought. Years passed. Emily left for college, carving her own path in the world. The house grew quieter. Claire's laughter, once the heart of every room, began to fade with illness. It was slow at first, a persistent cough, fatigue she couldn't shake. Doctors confirmed what they had feared: cancer. The word fell like a stone in their lives, heavy and merciless. Daniel became her caretaker, never leaving her side. Through hospital visits, sleepless nights, and difficult treatments, he was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. The ring might have been gone, but the vow it represented lived stronger than ever. Claire passed away one autumn morning, the air crisp with falling leaves. She was surrounded by love, her daughter at her side, and Daniel holding her hand until the very last breath. In her final moments, she smiled at him and whispered, "Forever." That single word carried her soul into the silence, and Daniel's world cracked. He buried her with a locket she adored, placing it gently on her chest before the coffin was closed. But inside his heart, he felt the wound of two absences, his wife and the ring that had been theirs. After her passing, Daniel aged quickly. His once steady hands trembled more often, his back bent with years of labour and grief. Emily, now married with children of her own, visited as often as she could. She encouraged him to live with them, but Daniel preferred his small house filled with memories. He found comfort in Claire's old recipes, her handwriting in the margins of cookbooks, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in a scarf she left behind. And, of course, he still visited the river. He would sit on the bank, cane resting beside him, and watch the water flow, whispering quietly as if Claire could still hear, "I miss you," every day. The river, always moving, always carrying time forward, held its secret deep beneath its currents, until one day fate intervened. On a bright spring morning, a fisherman named Thomas walked along the riverbank. He wasn't a professional fisherman, just a retired man who loved the peace of nature. His own life had been marked by hardships, a failed marriage, children who had drifted away, a lingering sense of loneliness he couldn't quite shake. For Thomas, the river was a sanctuary. It didn't judge, it didn't demand, it simply flowed. That morning, as he cast his line, something unusual caught his eye. The sunlight reflected off something in the shallow water near the rocks. At first, he thought it was a bottle cap, maybe a piece of broken glass. But curiosity tugged at him. He set down his fishing pole, waded into the cool water, and bent down. There, nestled in the silt, was a small golden band, worn, weathered, but unmistakably a ring. He held it in his hand, turning it over. Despite the years, faint engraving could still be read inside. "Forever, Claire." Thomas froze. He wasn't just holding metal, he was holding a story. Someone's promise, someone's memory. He felt a shiver down his spine. Who was Claire? Who had lost this? And how had it remained here for so long, waiting to be found? Instead of pocketing it, Thomas brought it to the local community centre, where lost items often ended up. He explained where he had found it, and soon the story spread like wildfire through the small town. People remembered. "That must be Daniel's," one woman said, recalling the old tale of the mechanic who had lost his wedding ring in the river decades ago. The news travelled quickly, and within days it reached Emily. She wasted no time. She drove straight to her father's home, holding the ring in her hands, her heart pounding. "Dad," she said, entering his living room where he sat in his favourite chair, a blanket over his knees, "I have something for you." Daniel looked up, his tired eyes curious. She placed the small box in his lap. Slowly, he opened it. When he saw the ring, his hands trembled, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, almost to himself, "You've finally come home." He held it as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. The years of loss, the grief, the memories, all of it seemed to wash over him. In that single moment, he wasn't just an old man holding a piece of gold. He was the young groom again, standing in Claire's parents' garden, slipping that very ring onto her finger as she smiled back at him. He was the father lifting his daughter in the air by the river, laughing as the water sparkled around them. He was the husband sitting beside his wife in the hospital, whispering promises to stay, even as she slipped away. The ring was more than an object, it was time itself, folding back into his hands. Emily wept silently, watching her father's face soften in ways she hadn't seen in years. He kissed the ring gently, as if kissing Claire's hand once more. "She kept her promise," he murmured, "forever." That night, Daniel placed the ring in a small wooden box on his bedside table, next to a framed photograph of Claire in her youth, her hair caught in the wind, her smile radiant. He didn't put it back on his finger. Instead, he let it rest where he could see it every night before he closed his eyes. To him, it wasn't about wearing it anymore. It was about knowing it had returned, knowing that love had a way of finding its way back, even through rivers and decades. In the days that followed, Daniel seemed lighter. His steps were still slow, his body still frail, but there was a peace in his eyes that Emily hadn't seen in years. He told his grandchildren the story of the ring, how it had been lost and found again. "Remember," he said softly, "the things that truly matter never leave us. Sometimes they just take the long way home." The river flowed on, as it always had. But now, for Daniel, it was no longer a place of loss. It was a place of return, a reminder that even what seems gone forever might one day come back, not in the way we expect, but in the way we need. And so, the story of a forgotten wedding ring became a story of love's endurance. It taught those who heard it that objects are never just objects. They are vessels, carrying pieces of who we are, pieces of those we've loved. And when they resurface, they don't just remind us of the past, they remind us of the power of love to endure beyond time, beyond grief, beyond even death itself. As Daniel drifted into the final years of his life, he no longer feared the silence of his empty home. He no longer dreaded the loneliness of night. Because he knew, in some mysterious way, Claire was still with him. The ring on his table glimmered softly in the lamplight, whispering the same word she had given him with her last breath: forever. Daniel thought the ring was gone forever, yet it returned when his heart was ready to see it not as a wound, but as a gift. That is how love works. It bends with time, it hides in silence, it waits in places we cannot imagine, and when it comes back, it whispers to us, nothing true is ever lost. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because the next story might just be the one you've been waiting for.